co-founder of and spokesperson for the Satanic Temple. Tonight, I'm here with legal counsel Stu De Haan, who has worked on several cases with us. We were going to be joined by Matt Kazaya, who is working on cases for us now, which actually is what's keeping him from being on here with us tonight because he's under several deadlines, which is fine. We said we'd pick up the slack and that we'd have plenty to talk about. But we wanted to do this legal update in particular about a case that has been around since December, I guess, because that was the holiday season, and that was when our Iowa congregation had put up a display in the Capitol Rotunda in Iowa where they had allowed holiday displays from various religious groups or whomever wanted to post displays there. And that's kind of an interesting element to this because I don't believe there was any prerequisite for people putting up holiday displays within the Capitol Rotunda to be from a religious organization. It just so happened that we are. And for some reason, and I say for some reason, even though people will say it's obvious why, but some people were offended by the display being there. But this wasn't necessarily fully anticipated by us because we do these things oftentimes without much reaction, without much pushback. And this seems kind of a benign activity to us. And plus the display really had nothing offensive about it if you looked at it and you didn't necessarily know the context, but people who are offended by Satanists having any presence within public spaces were really irritated, at which point a failed politician who ran for office, I think in 2022 by the name of Michael Cassidy, decided he wanted to act the hero. So he went from Mississippi to Iowa, Mississippi being his home state, and tore down the display. And this is something he fully admitted to, turned himself in for, and it was the coward's attempt at playing the hero. And we see how cowardly this was now, being that if it were truly heroic, you would think he would be willing to deal with the consequences of what he had done. But now the prosecutor has brought hate crime charges against him. And his lawyer is denying that this is a hate crime on really what seem to me bizarre grounds. She's saying, for one thing, that we're not a real religious organization. And on the other hand, she's also saying that what are the other arguments here, Stu? For one thing, she claims we're not a real religious organization, and also that organizations can't be religions anyways or can't represent religions.
One of the arguments is that since the crime wasn't targeted at a human being, at a person, then it can't be a hate crime. But the way that the hate crime statutes generally work, and I did look up the Iowa one, is essentially a hate crime is an aggravating factor that has specific elements to other crimes. So, for example, domestic violence in some states, not everywhere, but in Arizona, I know for a fact, there is a domestic violence statute that says if you commit an assault or various other crimes and you have a specific relationship to the victim, it becomes a domestic violence aggravator, which carries with it other penalties. Like that, I believe the hate crime statute in Iowa is if you commit this list of crimes, then and it's targeted towards a protected class, in this case, religious belief, and that's why you do it. It can fit the hate crime statute. So in this case, I believe it was either criminal mischief or criminal damage or something to that effect. Whatever the statute set is in Iowa is what was connected to the hate crime. So there is a question of who's the victim, and of course, somebody made that thing. Somebody put it up, one of our congregants. And, for my analysis, it does fit the hate crime statute.
Well, on the article I'm reading, it's from a site called littlevillagemag.com because the original article I read from the Des Moines Register is now paywalled for me, whereas it wasn't previously. But it says here, under Iowa code, criminal mischief is a hate crime when it is, quote, committed against a person or a person's property because of the person's race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, political affiliation, sex, sexual orientation, age, or disability. So according to this quote, it specifies property. And her argument seemed to go a bit stupider than you give it credit for, saying that organizations themselves cannot be considered religious or under religious protection. And I saw that today, the Christian Post, apparently knowing better than to reach out for me for a quote at this point, given how I very openly, publicly call them out for willfully printing lies and refusing to correct them. But they quoted from my Twitter feed where I pointed out that somebody needed to show this more on the Hobby Lobby ruling, where a corporation was not only deemed to be religious, but exempt from paying for contraceptive options for their own employees who might not share that religion with them.
Yeah, and that's true. However, in a criminal case, one thing that they'll probably do is reach out to whoever was the creator of this thing or whoever installed it or what have you, because then it's someone's property, right? That's part of the element. So clearly we have that. I assume that's been established already. So as far as that argument goes, I don't think it holds any water. So, of course they're going to go to the it's not a real religion argument, which I can talk in length about that also, but it's always going to come down to that whenever we do anything of what's a real religion, which is something the courts really don't like to touch because they understand it's not their purview to be deciding what's a real religion.
I think it's an inappropriate question even because I don't think it matters if this is to be considered by them a proper organized religion or merely religious opinion, which I would contest is just as protected. And in this, I blame the atheist community pre-existing the creation of TST for indulging themselves in the simplicity of bundling belief with dogma, superstition, authoritarian conditioning, and counterproductive tribalism, all for the benefit of being able to disown everything that speaks, that uses the term religion or religious in any type of way, insisting that they not be part of a protected class, which I think they had always been previously assumed to be part of. And if you read a lot of the old Supreme Court rulings when they dealt with issues of diversity in religion, and you read Scalia's opinion pieces when he would be speaking about religious liberty and expanding what religious liberty means, there was always that caveat that non-believers were not to be treated in any other way, nor were any of these public accommodations to be denied to non-believers simply for their non-belief. So I think they've totally moved the goalposts by arguing that we're not a religion, thus setting up the assumption that you have to be an organized religion and recognized as such in order to have access to public accommodations. Because now we're moving religious liberty away from being something that was simply meant to protect the equal rights of people practicing their religion and turning it into a super status where you have enhanced privileges if you identify with a religious group that is identified as such. And I think that itself is a dangerous maneuver or a dangerous shift that goes completely unrecognized and unrealized, in that it's outrageous to think that somebody of a specific religious opinion can't have a hate crime committed against them, whereas only people with supernatural beliefs can. Obviously, that defies the spirit of the law. It defies the spirit of inclusivity, diversity, and pluralism. And I think it's just a legalistic rhetorical ploy, and a very weak one, that's trying to change the landscape so completely to make us believe this. But I also think it's aided and abetted by the general ignorance of people who would be on our side, but are so quick to renounce any type of religious protection because they refuse to be lumped into that category that they insist must include blind faith, dogma, and all the things that they reject.
Yeah, and you bring up several points there, and the first one is that there has been this weaponization of religious liberty, because we know, and as I've been saying for years, whenever there's a religious liberty bill, it means someone's about to lose their rights, because what they're trying to do is establish religious dominance, not religious liberty, because they believe their liberty is to suppress the rights of the minority or unpopular religions. So, but there has been a change in demographics over time that has made the law more understanding and sympathetic to the non-theistic or the non-religious in the public sphere, because for a long time, when you had these religious tests in the Supreme Court, it did talk about a higher power, and they actually had to modify those and say, okay, there's such a thing as a non-theistic religion. A lot of Eastern religions, or they're polytheistic or what have you. They're not, Americans think of religion, they think of monotheism. There's one God, what have you in Western religion. But since the demographics in the country changed, so has the law. And clearly there's protections for the non-religious. And I think where we fall in this is to, especially the public, we're walking this line, because even our own supporters, like you said, and our own allies will say things like, oh, don't worry, they're not really Satanists, or they don't really believe in Satan, which creates this whole misconception that we're either just trolling or it's a political movement. And that's something that, you and I have been talking about this for a decade, how it's a complete misunderstanding of what we're doing. And there's also this aspect of why can't things be both? So we do walk that line, but it doesn't do us any favors that people really don't understand the concept of a non-theistic religion, because there's only kind of one definition of religion out there that Americans adhere to. So that argument that it's not a real religion, asking the court to define for us what our religion is to escape liability. And I agree with you, it's cowardly. If you're going to commit the crime and you're going to admit to the crime and you're doing it for your political gain to get notoriety, then own it. So, I don't fault the defense attorney for making these arguments, but it does kind of add to this coward's narrative. It's like, wait a minute, there's going to be real consequences for this? That's not what I was going for.
Right. Well, it was first third-degree criminal mischief, and then I saw some kind of conspiracist rumblings about, well, why now? Is there this much deeper charge, this much more horrific charge of a hate crime? And they act as though there must have been some behind-the-scenes dealings that must have led to this, because third-degree criminal mischief is a really nominal kind of thing, and probably a fine or whatever, whereas there's real consequences to having committed a hate crime and violating a hate crime statute. But what happened is this dumb fuck went around telling everybody why exactly he did it and what his motives were, and those motives were completely in alignment with what would be considered a hate crime under the Iowa Code. So it really didn't leave much room for interpretation. It really didn't leave, I don't think, the DA's office with much else to do but charge him with a hate crime thereafter. And I think that's appropriate if it's going to be appropriate in any case whatsoever. But it does seem that the defense is also arguing against the nature of hate crime statutes themselves and making the bizarre argument that he is being charged with a thought crime. I've seen that. I haven't seen the pleadings. I haven't seen any of the actual filings directly. I'm seeing quotes from the media, and one of them do include a statement from his defense claiming that he's being punished for a mode of thinking or a way of thought, which also seems like a bizarre departure from both general common sense reasoning and legal reasoning to make that leap from thought to action and claim that there's no distinction and that they're one and the same. Have you dealt with anything similar, or do you know about hard delineations regarding thought crime claims as opposed to taking tangible physical action, which he clearly did?
Well, you just made the distinction, and that's exactly right. I'm very sensitive to the concept of thought crimes, especially as a Satanist. That's something, if there were such things as thought crimes, and we did have a religiously dominant society, we would be the first ones in danger, right? For our blasphemy laws, things like that would be thought crimes, right? But it's funny to me because, of course it's not illegal to be a whateverist, a racist, a sexist. It's not illegal. However, when you take that bias and you cause somebody harm, and contrary to the law because of that bias, that's exactly when it becomes a crime. It's no longer a thought crime. It's now an actual crime. It's now a hate crime by definition. And we know why he did it, because he said so. I went to destroy this thing because I hate their religion. That's the definition of a hate crime. And to back out of it is it's kind of comical to me, because it was about getting some media attention. He never really considered the fact that this could have real consequences. And it's just, I really hope that this follows through, because it's, by definition, he committed a hate crime. So that's why I think they're going to have to try to rely on the argument that it's not a real religion with the courts. I mean, I can't imagine the courts defining our religion for us, especially since he said that's why he did it. It's completely bizarre. It's completely bizarre to think that he never considered this aspect of it when he committed this hate crime. It's utterly bizarre.
Well, one of the reasons I didn't talk about this much when it happened, I didn't write articles about it, and I never referenced Cassidy by name, and really just kind of hope this story would just kind of taper out, was because I didn't want it to go in the wrong direction, where people who have some animosity towards us see this man being treated as a hero, seeing the state apparatus do absolutely nothing about it, and even tacitly encourage it by maybe not prosecuting it or denigrating our religious status or any of the other number of things that they will do, and then lead other people who are simple, gullible, angry, looking for attention to come at us as well. And I think that's part of the importance in hoping and working towards seeing that this is treated equally in the eyes of the law as it would be with any other case. And to that end, I think already we can see that it's not. I think there would have been far more outrage and difficulty for him if it had been a different mainstream organized religious group that he had been up against. But the very least they can do, I think, is subject him to the same charges he would be.
Yeah, and it's all three. If you look at the philosophy of a criminal charge, it's retribution, restitution, and deterrence, right? So it's get what's reimbursed for what was destroyed, punish the person for doing it, and then deter others from acting like a fucking idiot. So I think in this particular case, and the whole concept of the hate crime statutes is exactly why. It's saying publicly, we do not tolerate this kind of behavior in a civil society. In the irony, these motherfuckers claim to be patriots when they will just destroy the Constitution. They will just, they don't believe in First Amendment liberties. They want to make sure that they hate constitutional liberties for other people. And then they will turn around and call themselves patriots, which is something that, Republicans and the religious right do quite often. But there was something I wanted to bring up. There was a Republican who denounced him. Dunwell Newton said, as a representative who believes in the Constitution, I don't want government being the arbitrator of what is an appropriate religious expression and what is not appropriate. I think government needs to be about creating freedom for all religious expressions. So big up to him for saying that in light of this kind of action by one of, a person in his own party. So that's an interesting aspect too, where I think, just because you're of a certain religion or political leaning, that doesn't mean that you're going to tolerate this in a civil society either. So it is good to see that.
Well, if you just look at the surface of this, you might say it doesn't matter that much more or less to me if Satanists are able to put up holiday displays in the Capitol Rotunda. It may seem a petty little battle to fight if people aren't really aware of where we're coming from and where this battle against a theocratic coup is going, but I do see it as a theocratic coup in effect. And whether or not the government refuses to recognize certain religious groups based on some metrics of theistic versus non-theistic, theistic veneration, superstition, as opposed to free inquiry and non-theistic thought. I think that's a battle against democracy and autocracy. And it's nothing short of that, because at the point where you have a narrow definition of religion and you insist that anything considered a religion must work within these parameters that clearly benefit just certain tribes of religious thought, you are setting up a coercive environment. You are lowering the civic capacities of non-believers. And when they are defining religious liberty, not just to give equal rights to people of a religious perspective, but to give them enhanced privileges and give them exclusive domain over certain public spaces, over certain public expression, that very much divides society entirely. And it divides society in a way that preferences the superstitious, the supernatural thinker, the theist, those who submit to authoritarian conditioning and believe that that authoritarian conditioning should be laid upon all the people who disagree with them. You want to talk about thought crimes, the idea of diminishing non-theistic thought so that it lowers the civic capacities of people who don't believe, that is essentially creating an environment where you are submitting them to the accusation of committing a thought crime. They do not have access anymore to certain public spaces because of the way they think. And to me, non-theistic thought has brought us all the best of progress. Having that kind of open-ended philosophy in which you can adjust your viewpoints based upon the best available evidence, rather than merely subverting back again and again to dead dogmas because you don't want to think any deeper. It's a horrific thing to preference. That is not something we should be encouraging, and it's certainly not something we should be giving willful dominance to. And this is why I'm so animated about trying to get atheist organizations and individuals to realize that what we're doing, and people have probably heard me say this before, is not, as many people say it is, us utilizing religious liberty laws as atheists just as a way to have access to those religious liberty laws. I reject that entirely. I reject the notion that because we're an organized religious group, that we're the only ones who have access to religious liberty claims. We're Satanists because we're Satanists. But if I were an atheist, just an atheist, working with atheist organizations, I would be very adamant in the idea that we should have no fewer privileges than anybody else due to our non-belief. And I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding that we've had an uphill battle against from the very beginning, that this was a ploy, that we're using a loophole, that religious liberty applies to religious tax-exempt organizations. And I think that's been people's stale thinking for some time now, and they haven't interrogated this deeply enough to realize what a bizarre maneuver that is and how much that benefits our opposition.
Yeah, and there's also the element that when you do grant special liberties to people that are either the predominant religion or of predominant religious thought, monotheism, what have you, it is kind of create a caste system, right? Because you're saying if you don't have this certain belief, you are not allowed in the public square. And that's what they want. Like guys that will go and destroy a minority religion's public display is saying, I want a caste system. I want you away from the public sphere. You need to go privately hide in your basement to practice your religion. That's what they want. And that is the most un-American thing I can think of. That's why this is so striking, is the absolute lack of self-awareness to this kind of thing. And it should be punished heavily, especially for somebody who's vying for a position of power in the government. That's the person who should know this the best. So the fact that we have such low caliber of elected officials in this country is it's embarrassing. It's frightening. The fact that we have to fight to not be in some kind of caste system here of we don't have rights because we don't believe the way this fucking guy believes. It's completely absurd. But it wasn't always the case, because a lot of these, like I was saying before, a lot of these religious tests in the Supreme Court, they did seem to imply that there had to be some kind of belief in a deity. And we saw this play out personally in the district court in Phoenix. I was actually going to bring this up if you want me to go through the Alvarado test, because we tested this in federal court, being a non-theistic religion, because of course the argument in Scottsdale for our invocation situation was that they don't belong here because they're not a real religion. It's always going to be something that's brought up. And the federal judge in that case went through what's called the Alvarado test and said, no, they have all the trappings, all the definitions of a religion.
But I was wondering about that, because we do have that federal ruling. Yes. We do have the IRS tax exempt status. And according to the Des Moines Register, the defense for Michael Cassidy, his lawyer, went to court with a dictionary and read a definition of religion that gave it a theistic bent, claiming that it's the veneration of an all-powerful being or something like that. And you will see that in dictionaries, but you also see that as one definition juxtaposed against multiple others. There's usually at least three definitions. And exactly. I would think a judge would be offended by the idiocy of somebody coming not with a legal case, but instead declaring that one particular definition in a dictionary is supposed to set the standard regardless of the precedent.
Well, let me go through this. I pulled up the Supreme Court case law, and if anyone out there is interested in looking this up, the case is called Alvarado v. City of San Jose. It was a Ninth Circuit case from 1996, so federal court, which defined legally what would constitute a religion. This was applied in Scottsdale through our plaintiff, Michelle Short, who testified in length about her Satanism. And the findings and conclusions were that Ms. Short's beliefs satisfied the first and second elements of the Alvarado test concerning fundamental and ultimate questions having to do with deep and imponderable matters. And the court goes through this list and says formal and external signs such as formal services, ceremonial functions, existence of a clergy, structure and organization, efforts to propagation, observance of holidays, and other similar manifestations associated with traditional religions. He even went through her jewelry and tattoos, her ceremonies and holidays with the Satanic Temple, structures and the organization of the Arizona chapter. And it quotes your testimony, talking about the headquarters in Salem, the structure, the processes of establishing ordination. So this actually all came out in court in Scottsdale, and it was found that we meet all these tests. Now, this isn't a dictionary definition. This is the legal standard for religion, and we more than meet that easily. I mean, that list, there's nothing we don't have on that list. So, whether, to come in and be like, read number one in Webster's dictionary, even though there's four other definitions and a legal test and all this, that's a disingenuous move, in my opinion.
But is it enough to piss off a judge, do you think? Do you think the judge is irritated by this kind of bizarre testimony, especially compounded as it is with these strange claims regarding thought crime? Because let me just say that this is I have a quote here now, and it just sounds crazy to me. The Register reported, it says, quote, because in this case, because this case seeks to punish Cassidy's thoughts, this is apparently the words of his lawyer, it cannot withstand constitutional muster as it violates the First Amendment, which protects the freedom to think.
He can think what he
I
wants.
just can't see a judge not getting pissed off at that and saying, well, do you not understand the situation here? We're not talking about what he was thinking about. We're talking about what he did.
It's what they're doing. What they're doing is they're trying to knock out the aggravating factor, right? So they're like, if they get rid of the hate crime, we're back to third-degree criminal mischief, because they're saying, all right, he broke something, but you can't then enhance his sentence because of the thought crime. That's what the argument generally is. But the whole reason for that statute has to do with motivation, the mental element of the crime, which is any crime. Any crime that's committed has a physical and mental element. It's called the mens rea, right? So the mens rea here was, I did this because of my hatred for the religion. And how do we know that? Because he fucking said it.
Right. Oh, he made a point of saying it everywhere he could and as publicly as he could in his quest for public acknowledgement and adulation. But speaking of being mental, somebody else pointed out that when he was running for Congress, he ran on a platform where he had a Law and Order segment, a page on his website, and one of the things he was looking to do, it said I support, and this is in the voice of Michael Cassidy on his site, locking up more criminals, eliminating so-called sanctuary cities, and a third bullet point is, in its entirety, quote, mandatory minimums for mob destruction of statues, infrastructure, and houses of worship, automatic 10 years in jail, plus the cost of repair.
So why don't we start with him?
Well, that's the thing. I think, but the scary part about this to me is that if you're going to be somebody who views this as a non-crime against specific people, but as such a heightened crime of a 10-year jail sentence in the context of if it attacks what he likes, that's a really dangerous mindset to have. It's a really, that's very authoritarian. That's very autocratic. That's just, it's very childish, really, as well.
It's illogical, it's hypocritical, but these people, there's no depth to their hypocrisy. I mean, we've known this for a long time. But what he's saying, I mean, what he's really saying, not his lawyers, but him, is, yeah, it's a hate crime, but it's justified hate crime. I should hate them, you should hate them, and we should run them out of town. That's what he believes. Of course, the lawyers can't make the argument, but that's really what he's saying is this is the right people to hate, which is why the hate crime laws exist. Again, the irony of this is just incredible.
So how do you predict this will go, or are you at liberty to say?
Well, okay. Oh, you did mention something that, before I forget, you said, would it piss a judge off? That is highly subjective to the judge, because we have a federal judge in, I think it was Alabama, who quoted in the IVF case, the frozen fetus situation, that to destroy a fetus was it a fetus? I don't know. Whatever was dropped on the floor in that case was to incur the wrath of a mighty God or something to that effect. Like, he actually quoted scripture in his ruling. This is a federal judge. This isn't a townie. So when you ask, will that piss off a judge? The answer is, I guess it depends on the judge, because it's gone so far theocratic. I mean, that quote, that the reason he ruled the way he did is to not incur the wrath of an almighty God. I mean, that's where we are. That's where we are right now. So I don't know is the short answer.
Well, that is something to point out to people too. Like, just because we feel very certain in our case doesn't mean that a judge is going to see it the same way. No matter how rock solid we think these principles are, they might have a very self-serving idea of what that means, and judges are just as prone to ignorant tribalism as anybody else, and we've seen that. And something I'll say that really distresses me is that our opposition is much better at seemingly understanding that the law is an argument, and that when it's not going their way, they should keep arguing the case even harder. Whereas I feel like on our side of the political spectrum, more so, we're entirely all too willing to just give up and say that, if we lose in the courtroom, that we must have been wrong all along and we need to regroup and rearrange our own thinking rather than stick by our principles and try to re-envision the world as we'd like to see it, or try to remodel the judiciary in a way that is more reasonable and more in alignment with democratic principles and constitutional values. And that's something I feel has been an ongoing problem that really needs to be addressed within progressive activism.
I agree. And I do think, we can get into that concept of progressive activism, how we just kind of narrow ourselves into more and more niche, esoteric, identity-based issues where we don't really have, like in other countries, we don't really have a collective. We don't have a system where we make alliances and forge ahead. And we've been trying to do that for years. But we knew this was an uphill battle. We're making novel arguments. We're fighting a very powerful and well-financed status quo. So, our legal team was, 3 people basically, me and the Kazayas. And now, we have ACLU jumping on board some of the cases, FFRF, but this we knew was going to take years to break through. And I'm glad that there are lawyers that are jumping on boards, that are funded, that have the fortitude to do this. But we knew it was going to be an uphill battle. And I think the reason it's, I guess easier for the other side is they're maintaining something that has already existed. It's like the incumbent view, right? They are just maintaining the thing that's always been, where we're trying to break through and make change, which is always going to be the hardest side, no matter what your cause.
Yeah, but to reiterate again, I feel like some of the ground we've lost, we just gave up. And that just brings me back to atheists insisting that they're not part of a protected class status because they can't stand to share that space with the religious. And therefore they won't accept protection for religious opinion. And I feel like that's a legal battle that hasn't been fought. And I feel like it's clear that that's always been the intention behind religious liberty laws, as those have been codified and laid down. That's always been kind of the silent background of it. But non-believers don't have any less privileges than anybody else. And now that's just completely shifted without anybody noticing, because non-believers for so long have been absolutely hostile to the idea of having religious protection. And that's been something that's never been to our benefit, I don't think.
Well, I would say that what they're doing is making a purely secular argument, where of course our arguments are operating in a secular system, but our argument is it's a pluralistic one. Is, we don't ask for them to remove the religion. The atheists are going to say, take this down. This has no place in the public sphere. What we're saying is just give us a seat at the table. But they've never dealt with this. The lawyers, the judges, the people that we either have to convince or we're fighting against have never dealt with this argument. They've dealt with the secular argument, and they're saying, look, we've got this many hundred years of religion being in the public space, just rubber stamp this thing. And we're going, well, what about the ones you don't like? What about the ones you don't believe in? And all of a sudden it creates this immense cognitive dissonance. But I think to a degree, like you're saying, it causes cognitive dissonance to the atheists as well.
Yeah. We have some questions. Somebody asked if there would be any benefit to local Satanists attending the trial. And I'll let Stu answer that, because you gotta have a better sense of what goes on in the courtroom than me. So from a basic concept of American law is there's no such thing as a secret trial. There's no secret tribunals. All trials are for the public to attend. And I think it makes a big difference when you have these city council meetings or these trials where the group that has been hate crimed against shows up. Because what it does is it shows the media, the community, the judiciary, that these aren't abstractions. We're real people in the community.
where people, where your doctors and lawyers and mechanics and plumbers, we're all these segments of society, we're military. And if we show up and be like, by you destroying this thing, we're saying, I don't belong here in the public sphere. And I think it's very powerful if you were just to show up and be civil, don't make a scene. There's a lot of temper tantrum activism going on right now, but just to show up and be like, we're not a distraction. I think it's a very powerful thing, and I do encourage that. And I always encourage people to be respectful in court and everything else. Don't act like that guy. The best revenge is to not be like him. And yeah, I do say to show up to that and watch and make a showing that we're real. We're real people, and it's a real religion.
Yeah, and that these things matter to us. That we're not just these pranksters who are laughing all the way. Yeah. As these things happen to us, because that's often, I think, how we're presented by the press, as these madcap merry trolls who go around doing these things and just laughing at the destruction it wreaks upon the simple-minded.
Yeah, they think that this is just a big joke to us, but this puts us in danger when there's a politician, someone in the government, who says this is something I can get away with, and everyone throws money at him saying, yeah. I mean, we need them to see, like, how does it make you feel? That puts us in danger. Like, all other marginalized groups, that puts us in danger when a politician is saying it's open season on these guys. It's not right. It's not right. And there should be a punishment for that.
Yeah, he did crowdfund a good amount. I forget what the ultimate amount was, but I think
I saw it was $130,000.
Yeah, that's okay. That's a pretty good start on his legal bills, at least. So, yeah, it hopefully people don't get the message that it's simply lucrative to come and attack us, and that's one of the reasons. Exactly, like I said, right?
Concern of mine.
Right. And I feel like they kind of have to charge him with something now. It kind of has to hurt, or they're just calling out the dogs on us.
But imagine giving money. Imagine being like, this politician wants to take away constitutional rights from a peaceful minority group. I want to support that. What kind of people are giving this guy money? It's obscene.
Another question asks, is TST facing any significant threats to its officially recognized status? And that's a good question, because in my mind, it's not, but also in my mind, there was no way we should have lost the Scottsdale case. And I'm also recovering from the horror of our Boston case, where the corrupt Boston City Council officials got away with making the argument that they have a non-discriminatory invitation-only policy to give invocations before city council meetings, a complete non sequitur answer that the moronic judge never bothered to reconcile, but just completely threw aside our claims and decided that, yes, they can give preferential treatment because we refuse to call it preferential treatment, but the outcome is the same anyways, but through some kind of semantics, we'll call it something else, and that's it. Just the kind of things I never thought would happen. But we do have the buffer in the case of our recognition of the fact that we do have our IRS tax exempt status, and we do have the federal ruling from Scottsdale, where even though they decided that they couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that we were discriminated against, that it would be wrong to discriminate against us as we are an actual religious group. It would be wrong to say because of our religion we don't have access to these public spaces. So it was a weird kind of win-lose in Scottsdale. We lost the core of the case, and they affirmed our religious standing. And then when I see the defense in Iowa here come in questioning our religious status with nothing better than a singular dictionary definition, I don't think that's a very strong case to make, but it can be a good enough case to a stupid enough judge. But I still don't see that getting anywhere in an appeals court, regardless of how difficult appeals are. I still feel like that would be a big, bizarre, egregious move. So I don't feel particularly threatened yet, but I do feel uneasy given the relentlessness of the propaganda proclaiming that we ourselves admit we're not a religion when we are open about the fact that we're non-theistic, and how people feel that non-theistic is just synonymous with non-religion or trolling, as they like to translate our words in the most convenient ways to them. And just how much traction this seems to get within the opposition circles of media and social media, and repeating these lines over and over again to the point where a lawyer actually feels comfortable going to a judge in Iowa, waving a dictionary. I'm still a little concerned, even though I feel like we have the most solid foundation we could have possibly laid.
I feel, and I agree with you completely on what you're saying, is I don't feel threatened in that sense. What I do hope for, and, philosophically, I suppose, is that more conservatives, I call these guys that are going around doing this shit, like the defendant in this case, these are the big government Republicans. They want big government. They want to tell you who can have babies, who can't have babies. They want to tell you how to worship, what to worship. They want to control. They want the government controlling every aspect of your social and private life. And I think it's going to take a turning of the conservatives that do actually believe in limited government to be like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Like, this has gone to complete madness. And I just hope in our freaking lifetime that we see a little more of that. So when I did see a Republican, kind of speak out against that guy, it kind of gave me a little bit of hope, just in a microcosm sense, that at least not everyone is going to be a destructive bigot towards us and then raise a bunch of money off of it. That's what's concerning, is that people threw money at him. That makes me feel really weird.
Yeah. No, that's what makes me feel like it's really dangerous. When you actually see the potential for profitability behind this kind of thing, you really have to hope that the law is enforced to make sure that there really are consequences.
It's open season on us. If we can hurt one of these people and everyone will throw money at me, what the fuck?
Well, somebody asked a question, and I'm not comfortable answering it because I don't know enough about it, but maybe you will. Somebody says, I'm wondering if the Federalist Society pushes Christian nationalism, or if Christian nationalists just happen to be members of the Federalist Society. And I'm not familiar enough with the Federalist Society to have any opinion on that.
Hold on. Let me think about this. If I'm wondering I think it goes hand in hand. I think whatever claims they're making, they have similar goals. So I guess to that I would say both. I think the whole concept of Christian nationalism is becoming an emergent norm, meaning that this stuff used to be fringe, or at least used to be pretextual, with more sinister undertones, but now it's just open. Authoritarianism is really in style right now. It's really popular, populist kind of things, the status quo just dominating. And this is all because of changing demographics. I'm convinced of this. Every time there's this kind of upset from the satanic panic I guess I'll just focus on that since we're here, but it's always a response to changing demographics, where all of a sudden really, demagogues start ruling, and the hateful rhetoric becomes normalized. It's because people are afraid that the way of life they know is changing, and that scares them, and it scares them for their children. That's why it's always the children. It's because they want their children to grow up in the exact same box they grew up in. And when they see that box coming apart, they need a scapegoat. And it's a tale as old as time. So I just think Christian nationalism is becoming intertwined with a lot of things that aren't fringe.
Yeah, and like with the Federalist Society and other organizations, things seem to be moving at such a rapid clip now within the culture wars that I'm hesitant to speak on my perception of any organization that I haven't checked in on in the last 2 or 3 years.
Right. I agree.
If you're talking about libertarianism in the 1990s, I think you're talking about a completely different political entity than you'd be talking about right now. One in which these ideas of merging with right-wing Christian nationalists would be antithetical to what I think most people identified with who considered themselves libertarian at the time.
Well, even
And
Republican, even
it's-
Republican concepts.
Right. And well, now it's just become another, and in some cases, a more extreme version of the Republican camps we see pushing the Christian nationalism that we see now.
Exactly.
And somebody who asked, when did the Boston City Council thing happen? Well, I think check the website. We probably have some write-ups about this, but the ruling did come sometime in this past year, 2023. And from the very beginning, it was clear that the judge was dismissive and going to ruling against us in every filing that we made, giving a pass to Boston's lawyers who failed to file several times and giving them extensions that we certainly wouldn't have had, not allowing us to do discovery. It was the mayor herself who penned our denial, for our request, asking to give an invocation. And we weren't allowed to depose her because she was too important of a public figure. And thus really denying us the chance to really make our case or gather evidence, and then, of course, throwing out the case because we have none of that. So I think Boston was a really egregious case, but almost more egregious are the people who say that they're progressive and say that they're on the side of pluralism and the side of our arguments, who denigrate us every time a judge rules against us, rather than recognizing what a violation of common sense and legal ethics the judge really participated in. Well, in any case, Stu, what do you think will happen if the judge finds in favor of the defense? Say a judge takes these arguments, is idiotic and as facile as they are, and says, you make a good point, I rule in your favor. What then?
Well, the problem to me is that this is high profile. And when you've got a high profile case where you've got the judiciary saying, that's fine, what you did was okay, that's, like I said, that's open season on us. What's going to stop anyone from doing it and raising a ton of money while doing it? I mean, it sets a really bad precedent for religious liberty, frankly, because it's just saying, as long as the religion is unpopular enough, go at them, have at it, get a GoFundMe, it's fine. You know, I don't know. And it could go to jury trial, right? If it goes to jury trial and the jury finds not guilty on this, even though he admitted the crime, right? That's the public. That might even be worse, right? Because then that's the public saying it's open season on us. And then, I mean, there is an existential threat there, I think, because of what could happen in the public image of us, religious liberty. What's acceptable religious expression will now be defined. Who can be hurt and destroyed will be defined. You can get away with this, that's fine. Not good. It's not good.
Well, you talk about the ramifications for religious liberty, and I feel like I've kind of harped on this several times, but I think it's worth saying again. My conception of religious liberty, I think, is far more expansive than that of some. And some people might hear that it will have a negative impact on religious liberty and think that that wasn't really a necessary component of their lives anyway. Mm-hmm. But I really think we need to start thinking of religious liberty more in the context of freedom of thought, freedom to believe or disbelieve, and to act upon those opinions in the way that we see fit insofar as they follow the law, which we did when we put up a display in Iowa, and somebody broke the law, violated that law unquestionably by smashing our display. And if hate crime laws do apply against anybody attacking somebody for their religion, it should apply to them attacking somebody for their religious beliefs, including non-belief. And you may care little about what happens to Satanists specifically, but in general, the ramifications are broad and they are severe, and they should not be overlooked or underestimated. This is of vital importance to everybody, all our rights, all our liberties, all that we are in the United States as a nation really is on trial here to a certain degree. And I don't think that's overly hyperbolic to say that. I think a case like this, 10 years ago would have been unheard of, and we wouldn't have thought for a moment that it could go against us in any such a way. But I think our opposition has grown so emboldened now, knowing they have so many people in public office whose first loyalty is not to the Constitution, but is to their religious tribe. And that is the threat we are facing right now. And people really need to make noise about this one, because it is that important. It is that fundamental. And it's not just simply a holiday display and it being torn down. The broader philosophical implications here are so huge that I think people need to absolutely be clear on that and understand that this is no small issue at all.
I agree.
Well, I think we'll have to call it at that, unless you have any parting words.
I think you summed it up there. That was good. I think this really, okay. I do have some parting words then. I do think these issues, when looking from the outside, sometimes it seems like not a big deal. Why did we fight for 4 years for a 2-minute invocation in a city council in Arizona? Why are we fighting for, the Baphomet monument? How many years is that going on? All of these things, 8 years we're in litigation for Baphomet. All of these things from the outside might raise an eyebrow for the disinterested and be like, why would you fight so much for a 2-minute speech? But the implications of this are so far reaching to not just us, but to civil society, constitutional law, basically how we're going to structure this society going forward. And are we going to protect it from the people that would seek to destroy everything that's different from them, everything that's unique, anything that's not the status quo? These create very dangerous precedents if we've got a branch of the government saying, that's fine, you can destroy what you don't like. And I think this is the battle that we've always fought, and it's the battle we're going to continue to fight as long as we do this. But every time we talk about a different legal issue on here, it always has these far-reaching consequences. So I'm glad for anyone watching that's interested in this, that you're participating in this process. And I do encourage you to show up to these public events.
Thank you, Stu. Until next time.
Thank you for having me, and look forward to it. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.